Hi guys, it's Darren here from Photography Learners, and I've just got a quick. The image that you're seeing in front of me here is an image by Jen Clutton. She'd put the question out to the group, what can she do with regards to the sky? And a few suggestions there were to actually do a sky replacement and that sort of thing. Now I know that you're working in Lightroom, so we'll go through Lightroom first, but then we'll show you the process of just replacing the, or how I would actually replace the sky in this instance. Again, there's a number of ways that you could replace it, but we'll just be going through the method that I find suitable for this one. Okay, so we're looking at Jen was kind enough to send through the raw image. So here's the raw image that we're looking at straight out of camera. Okay, so the first things that generally when I'm working in Lightroom, I start at the top and just work my way down. I find that the easiest workflow for me, and that's the way I've been doing it for a number of years. Okay, so the first thing that we're looking at here is the color temperature. In my mind, probably looks a little bit cool. We can see it sitting at around about 4,800 degrees Kelvin, so I might just warm that up a little bit. So that's fine there. I don't really want to push it too much. Exposure-wise, we don't really need to change exposure because, as you can see in our histogram, just looking at our histogram, we're not clipping anywhere in the blacks, and we're not clipping anywhere in the highlights. So we do have a little bit of information retained in the sky there. So it's been shot fairly well given the circumstances that there's a fairly wide dynamic range between the sky and the shadows and whatnot in the shade. You're going to get a fairly large discrepancy there with dynamic range, but it's handled quite well in this instance. Okay, so moving down the process of Lightroom here. Highlights, you can pull your highlights back and just see what that does. So it just brings out a little bit of information there. So that's, you could pull it all the way back if you really wanted to. But again, it's still not adding a lot to the sky, but in this case, there's probably not a lot to that you can do with regards to this particular sky from a color perspective, etc., etc. But let's just run with it to start with. So I've just pulled that slider all the way back. Shadows, we can probably bring out a little bit of detail with the shadows there as well. Just moving that slider up until, yeah, that seems to, just putting out a little bit more detail in the shadows here. Not going to touch anything with the whites and blacks. I don't really need to touch anything with the blacks. If I pull the black slider down, yeah, we might do a little bit there. And I might just bump that temperature up slightly. Okay. Now, it's kind of in the greenish sort of hues. I'm kind of sort of seeing green hues there, so I might just pull the tint up slightly as well. So that's balancing that out a little bit better for me. Okay, so clarity, let's have a look at the clarity. That pulls a little bit more detail out and gives us a bit of contrast in the shadow area of the image. Vibrance, we can probably pull the vibrance up. Now, vibrance generally is used in relation to, well, I tend to use it when I'm doing portraits. If I want to boost the colors but kind of maintain skin tones, vibrance has a tendency to work quite well in that instance. I'm not going to pull the saturation up because we might do some things with the saturation sliders and things like that. Curves, again, don't really want to play too much with curves. Maybe just boost a little bit. Now here's what you can do if you want to pull out a little bit more detail in the dark channel. But by doing that, you're kind of flattening the image. So I'm just going to reset that. Now you can reset any of these sliders just by double clicking on the actual icon. That will reset it back to 0 if you didn't know that already. Okay, moving down to the hue, saturation, luminance. Not going to change colors with regards to hue. Saturation, you could probably, if you wanted to, you can pull the saturation of the blues up, for example. So I can click on this little knob, little button here. So that way I can actually just go onto the screen and adjust it where I actually want to adjust it. So looking at that one, you can see I'm really sort of boosting the saturation of the blues there. It's not really having much effect. But what will have a fairly big effect is the luminance. So if I pull that luminance down, and I suspect that's what Jen has already done, but anyway, we'll just leave it with that at the time being. Don't really need to change much else. Any sort of sharpening, I'd probably finish that off later. And noise reduction, don't need to worry too much about that. Shot at ISO 400, so it looks pretty clean. Apart from that, not much else I really want to do in that instance. So yes, it's pretty difficult to sort of get a huge sort of variation in images there. You could start playing with the sliders here, the graduated filters. You could maybe drop the exposure a little bit on this side. Let's boost our clarity a little bit, and a little bit of dehaze going on there. So if we pull that in, that's giving us something a little bit closer probably. Maybe don't need such a gradient on that one. We can pull that across, and that's still maintaining a fairly sort of a natural sort of a look there. So that's one way of doing it, just with sliders. Now the other thing I'll do is I'll just fix up the horizon just quickly there. So just using this angle or the ruler, it's a straighten tool. Just click on one point and drag that out across and release, and that straightens up the image for me. Okay, so that would be my Lightroom process. I wouldn't do a whole lot more in regards to Lightroom. But in the instance of doing a sky replacement, I'll just maybe reset those highlights. And again, with the luminance, I'll just reset. That's just by double clicking, because we're going to do a sky replacement. Okay, so with the image as it is there, it's all straight and ready to go. So we'll have a look at that in Photoshop. Okay, so we've got that file open in Photoshop now. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is make a selection. So if we're going to do a sky replacement, then we need to make a selection of that sky region, and plus all these little bits in here. So it can be a little bit tricky, and like I said, there's 100 different ways you can probably make that selection. In this instance, probably the method that I would use would be the select, and we're going to do a color range. So in the instance here, I'm just going to click on the image. I'm going to hold down Shift just to add those color regions. So as you can see here, as I'm adding those colors in the diagram on the right here, the white is actually showing us our selection, and the black is the what's going to be remaining. So you can see here that it does a fairly good job of making that selection. Get some of these colors up in there. Now you can adjust this fuzziness, and you can see that, and the fuzziness is just the accuracy, I guess. So the higher the number, the less accurate it is, and we can kind of see around about that 40, 50, 45, 48. That's roughly around about where we can sort of get a fairly clean selection. Wouldn't worry about too much of this other stuff, because we can mask that out later. Okay, so with that one, I'm just going to click OK, and I'm going to use it as a selection. Okay, so we can see what we've actually selected there. Now, you can, I'm not going to worry about it in this instance just for the speed factor, but of putting this out. But basically, I've got that selection now. If I click on my selection tool, I can do a select and mask. So we can kind of see what it's actually selected there. In this instance, I'm probably going to shift the edge a little bit, and you'll see why later when we've actually having a look at this when we throw the mask on. And also I'm going to use the edge detection. So it's going to pick up a bit of that edge detection. And if you look sort of closely there, you can kind of see where it's now starting to encroach slightly on the actual foliage. So that should give us a fairly sort of clean. Again, don't worry about what we're seeing down here. And also down the bottom here, we'll fix that up later when we've created our mask. So in that instance there, I might just feather it like half a pixel, maybe 0.5 of a pixel. And that will just soften it up, because you can get those really sort of hard artifacty like edges when you do these sorts of selections. So I just like to soften it just that little bit by feathering it. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that as a selection. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to save that selection for the moment. So if we go under select, I can save that selection, and I'm just going to call that one sky. So that's saving that to a new channel. So I can deselect that now just by hitting Control D. Now what I'm going to do is, here's a sky that I'm going to use just for this example. I'm just going to pull that sky onto this image and give me a bit of a lineup of where I might want to sort of see that. I'll just reduce the opacity on that slightly so we can kind of see where that's going to overlay. And round about there is probably fine. Maybe just move it down just a smidge. Okay, so that's where I'm actually going to put the image, the sky replacement. Now, what I'm going to do is go into the selection and load the selection that we previously made, which is the channel sky. Okay, so that's now selected that. So I'm just going to put a mask on that using that selection. So I'm just applying the mask tool. Okay, so what we've basically done there is just applied that mask. Now you can kind of see around the foliage there where it looked pretty ordinary. So we'll have a little bit of a play with that one, but first off, I'm just going to clean up this mask a little bit here by just removing it where, like I said, you could do this before. Now I'm going to go with a fairly hard edge brush. Just going to boost that hardness up. We'll go 100%. And obviously I'll raise my flow to 100, so I'm just sort of getting rid of that, just really roughly. Okay. Oh. Make that a little bit smaller. Get rid of that off there. Okay. Okay, so that's pretty clean. But you kind of get the idea. You can just go around and play with that and get rid of where that mask has gone on where you don't really want it to do. Okay, so now it still looks pretty ordinary there. So this is where you can try, just blending it and changing opacity. So in this instance, I'm going to leave the mask on and I'm just going to paint that off slightly. So for that, I'm going to go with a soft brush, which is 0 hardness, and I want a fairly big brush. Let's go a little fairly big brush, and I'm really going to bring that flow right down. So I'm going to keep it around about 6-7%. Even that's too much, so Control Alt Z, just undo that one. Maybe just 4%. So we can kind of see there that we're just sort of going to slightly take that off. I'm going to go down to 1%. And so that's blending a little bit better, I guess. A little bit on that horizon as well. And now if I just drop that opacity, okay, so that's, if we look at that without, that's giving us a fairly good sort of a finish, I guess. And that looks fairly believable if we move that in. It looks fairly believable around the foliage now, whereas before it was looking quite harsh and raggedy. So that's probably as much as I would do. If I brought that back into Lightroom now, if I just save that one and we switch back over to Lightroom, and now what I can do is just put some finishing touches on it, bump that clarity up, and that'll just blend things a little bit better. Now we can play with our curves there. So if we're having a look at that, that sort of gives us a little bit more of a believable sort of a look to the image, and it's improved the sky. Well, in my opinion, I think it's improved the sky. If we do a side-by-side comparison of the raw file, let me just bring out a little bit of detail in the shadows there, and we do a quick comparison. So on your right is the raw file straight out of camera, and on the left is the finished image with a sky replacement, showing a little bit more of a mood. If we wanted to add a little bit more mood to that one, if we just go back to our develop module, and now we can bump up the warm temperature, so it actually sort of blends it fairly nicely together. And sharpening, if we wanted to apply a little bit of sharpening there, I wouldn't go crazy with it. If you wanted to smooth things out a little bit, but still maintain that detail, that's just adding a little bit of noise reduction, and that's pretty much all I would do. Hopefully that's been helpful for you, Jen, and if you've got any questions, by all means, just get in touch. Okay, thanks again.